I looked at the parsha and I developed a theory, a hypothesis, and I went to do some research and I came up with nothing. So you will have to tell me whether you agree or whether, whether there's maybe something to my thought or really whether I've just totally missed the boat at all. So let me start off by reading a very, very short article to you that um, it interested me in any case. I hope it interests you. And I'm going to switch it onto my screen instead of the paper so that I look up and you don't hear pages rustling. Okay, so the article was written by a person named Benjamin Judd on a website which is 9.com.au. I think .au is in Australia, right? And not Austria, yeah? Okay, I see some nodding heads. Well, it's either Australia or Austria. We'll find out at some point in the future. In any case, Benjamin Judd at 9.com, either in Australia or Austria, in 2016, wrote a short article, Why Bad Things Happen in Threes. And he starts off, and it sounds almost like he could have written it in 2020 or 2021. He writes, 2016 hasn't started as amazingly as we had all hoped. That sounds familiar, no? So even in 2016, we were complaining. First, music legend David Bowie quietly returned to Mars. And just as we were preparing to take off the black lace veils, Hollywood's best villain, Alan Rickman, also died. And because the death of two icons isn't horrible enough, colleagues gathered around water coolers and friends in your Facebook feed all seem to be whispering, who's next? There's a niggling belief in the Western psyche that bad things always happen in threes, from natural disasters to household mishaps. If it's happened twice, it's definitely going to happen a third time, particularly when it comes to death. And it doesn't seem like any rational belief. Sometimes celebrities do appear to die in groups of three. In 1997, the world was shocked by the deaths of Mother Teresa, Princess Diana, and Gianni Versace. In 2009, it was Michael Jackson, Farrah Fawcett, and Ed McMahon. So, he says, yes and no. Let's start with no. Our fascination with the number three is more rooted in logic than superstition. A twisted logic, but logic nonetheless. In a 2013 interview with NBC News, John Hoops, a professor of anthropology at the University of Kansas, stated humans are naturally inclined to seek out patterns. Patterns in death, patterns in misfortune. Those are things that help us try to understand the universe or try to understand reality in a way that makes sense of us, Hoops explains. In general, we're very uncomfortable dealing with randomness. Think about it this way. You look at a bowl of Skittles, the candy, and instead of delicious individual Skittles in the bowl, you'll start to see clumps of color. 4 yellows, 2 reds, 7 greens. And this has a name. In 1958, it was given the name of a psychologist that I don't see here. I must have edited it out by accident, called apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random data. We're also hardwired to recognize the number three thanks to a lifetime of ingrained conditioning. 3 acts in a play. For some people, not us, the Holy Trinity. Goldilocks and the how many bears? Exactly. How many flavors in Neapolitan ice cream? Basically, we like the number 3. Maybe it has something to do with triangles being the basic multi-sided shape, who knows? So while it may seem like celebrities always die in groups of 3, no such pattern really exists. If you Google deaths in the year of whatever, you'll find that actually quite a lot of people died, not just 3, a whole lot more than 3. And not just normals, but people who, while not famous to you, were hugely influential in their respective communities. So in a way, whenever we ghoulishly wait for a 3rd celebrity death, all we're really doing is waiting for something logical and inevitable to happen. Only we are applying meaning to it by calling it a pattern. So why do I look at this at all? What did we read in the Torah this week? We read about the plagues. And I started doing some reading about the plagues and discovered something quite interesting. I went to the Encyclopedia Judaica. Those of you who might remember seeing on some people's shelves, usually the rabbi's shelf, if you went into the rabbi's office, you know, this multi-volume, large, teal blue kind of set of books. You don't see them anymore. I've had numerous offers, people giving them away now because it takes up so much real estate on the bookshelf when it can all be, you know, on a file in the computer. So it's amazing how, you know, how cheap you can pick up a set of Encyclopedia Judaica, if not for free. In any case, so I went to the Encyclopedia Judaica to do some reading about plagues, and I came up with the following: that the narrative shows a deliberate, even if somewhat imperfect, design. Step 1, the plagues gradually intensify. So all of us have been to a Seder. This isn't news to anyone. We know that part. It begins with nuisances, step 1. It passes through destruction of livestock and crops, step 2, and ends with the death of human beings, step 3. These trends, if we want to call them that, correspond to the formal division of the story. If you look at the description of the plagues and how they're unrolled and announced, into 3 sets of 3 plagues, capped by a 10th, in a pattern that is determined by an invariably recurring order of introductory clauses. So we have plagues 1, 4, and 7 begin in a particular way. There's a pattern here, pattern of 3s, with God commanding Moses to stand before Pharaoh in the morning at the Nile and to warn him about what's going to happen. Plagues 2, 5, and 8 begin with the command to enter Pharaoh's residence to warn him there. Plagues 3, 6, and 9 begin with the command to bring on the plague without warning. And there's even some allusion to this pattern of 3 in the Haggadah itself. A certain design can also be discerned in the various agents who induce the plagues. In the first 3, Moses warns, but Aaron then signals the coming of the plague. In each case, the Egyptian magicians respond. The triplet continues, it intensifies, between all of these people, with these same actors. It's decided only in the 3rd plague, when the magicians who are unable to produce lice confess that this has to be the work of a higher power. In this context, the principal characters, Moses and Pharaoh, are each represented by some deputy, by the magicians for Pharaoh, by Aaron, and so these are the patterns. And when Aaron reappears in a role in the 6th plague, the magicians reappear with him. In the last triplet, Moses both announces and induces the plagues, thus enhancing his prestige. He shows that he really has validity. He knew what was coming. He spoke the truth. He was really God's agent. God directly brings on 2 plagues of the middle triplet. And the third one, which is boils, is induced by Moses and Aaron. Well, that one is asymmetrical. And then there's number 10, which caps them all, the final firstborn, the death of the firstborn. So we have these sets of 3 plagues, and I started thinking to myself, I looked around, I found the first article that I read to you in 2016. I found another similar article. And what was I looking for? Any guesses? Cindy, I see, exactly. So I see Cindy was mouthing something I couldn't understand. Lewis went like this. I was disappointed that Dan didn't unmute himself to read my mind, because he usually does. I was looking for the story of Pesach, for the plagues, these sets of 3, to maybe have entered the subconscious of the Western world as such that we now expect bad things to happen in what? In 3s. And what did I come up with? As my Zeta would say, garnished, nothing. My theory seems to be totally worthless. Karen, who is a mathematician, is now burying her head in her hand to think to herself, is this the kind of rabbi we got? I came up with nothing, useless. So I don't know if any of you have any other theories, whether you want to add something to the plagues, whether you want to add to the Western preoccupation with 3s or anything. But I'm done at this point. I'm about to tune out in embarrassment, and thought that I would give anyone else an opportunity to add anything before we move on. Just remember to unmute yourself, please. Nothing?
I think that we as human beings just always look for patterns or explanations, even when I always tell the story of how my father had dementia, and he always said he couldn't die until I was married. I didn't get married till I was 40, and then exactly a month to the day after I got married was when he died. So that could just have been random, but as a human being, I needed to see it as having meaning. I think that, and like you said, the things coming in 3s. If you depends who you talk to. If you have a conversation with 5 people, then you can come up with 3. If you have a conversation with 7 other people, you might have 5. But we just stop there. We say, see, so and so, so and so, and so and so, and then we just stop, and then we begin again. The next set of numbers, a month later, oh, so and so, so and so, and so and so. So, I just think it's human nature to look for these patterns.
Great. So Barney is echoing the theory provided by Benjamin Judd, that we look for patterns. We are in, this is how we work. Cindy.
Wow. Well, I was going to type that 3 is a prime number, and then Bonnie reeled off a whole bunch of prime numbers, 3, 5, 7. And Einstein said, God doesn't play dice. So that, I think that our attempt to look for patterns is our attempt to control the universe. And I know I've heard this Baba Misa, and most of these Baba Misas do not come from Jewish superstitions. They usually come from something from Gentile stuff. So
Okay.
I'd like to look into that about trouble coming in 3s.
Hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought. We will come back to that. If I don't come back to it, because my memory is poor, as all of you know, please remind me.
But wait a minute, but I'm not finished. But if in my life, if two things happen, I say, oh, I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop. And when the third thing happens, I say to myself, now I can relax. Three bad things have
Right,
happened.
we've all heard that. Exactly. Now we can, now we can sit down and relax. Helen.
I look at it not so much as the threes, but for a reason. We're looking for a reason, and if the threes are the reason, or if the family's been all together and then Zadie passes away a week later, it's because of that. So I think we're always looking for that reason.
We struggle with having a sense of meaninglessness, of that something happened, it's too random to bear, to deal with. We got to find some kind of logic that we can apply to this, because if we can't, then that is deeply challenging and threatening to our intellect, to our sense of safety. Who knows what's going to happen next? If that could have happened without any reason, that means something could happen next. And yeah, exactly. Anyone else? I see Leon, yes.
Well, it's not three, but there is actually a statistical reason for random events occurring in clusters. If you actually, and this has been done experimentally, if you look at random events and the time intervals between individual events, the distribution of time intervals forms, it's part of a bell-shaped curve. So it starts up and it goes up and then it comes down. And I can't remember the name of the distribution. I really ought to know that. I've known it for years. I'm getting old. In any case, what this means is there's a lot and then it comes down. So what happens is you've got lots and lots of short intervals between random events, and then you have a smaller number of longer intervals. So short intervals means a cluster. So random events come in clusters, that's statistical, and there's no predicting how many is in the cluster, whether it's 3 or 5 or 6 non-random, a non-prime number. Anyhow, you can't predict how many are going to be in the cluster, but there will be clusters. And then our tendency to impose order on this is what comes up with the things come in threes.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So okay, Lisa, I'm going to suggest that you have the final word, and then I want to just make a comment back to what Cindy said, and then we'll move on. So please go ahead.
Just wanted to throw out the idea that people keep on talking about lengths of times between random events, but I was just throwing out the possibility that maybe the events aren't random.
Well, exactly. So that I think is completely consistent with what Helen said, with certainly in a different. I don't know if that's consistent with Leon's point, but our sense for trying to understand, attaching some logic, however way off in the in space that logic may be, attaching some sense of intention or versus chaos, that things are just happening. So yes. So without wanting to take away anything that might be meaningful to you, Cindy, you spoke about, is the superstition. Well, I haven't seen any Jewish superstition, but I've seen it elsewhere in terms of this particular issue. And, I think Jews can be plenty superstitious too. I remember my grandparents' generation who came from Eastern Europe were plenty superstitious. And I think it's not just Ashkenazi Jews who had the capacity for it. I think Sephardi Jews have it plenty as well. And then I once saw this rabbi, I think he was from Aish HaTorah, and doing a presentation one night about something called Torah codes. And this was back in the 90s when we were all very concerned about Saddam Hussein, and he started showing us how some scholars of Torah had started trying to decode the Torah and the Talmud, and if you would enter into a computer to find every letter within certain intervals, the most amazing things would come up. And guess what? The name in Hebrew letters, of course, Saddam Hussein, Iraq, came up in the Talmud because they entered in the correct interval of between letters. And whoa, people were amazed. What else can you do, Rabbi? And guess what else he could do? They came up with something that spelled the word, this was the 80s, AIDS. 80s or 90s, AIDS, this disease that was ravaging humanity. And people were hooked and buying the books in the lobby after the presentation. And my father turned to me and said, Michael, let's go home. He said, I've got no time for doing circus tricks with the Torah. Let's go. And it's interesting. For some people, this, what the rabbi presented was all the proof and evidence they needed that the Torah has this element of mystery and prophecy and stuff that it could tell us if only we knew how to ask the questions. And others of us thought, oh, please do me a favor. This is just pushing it. This is going too far. So there it is. I leave it up to you. I tried to investigate whether this pattern suggested by the Encyclopedia Judaica in the plagues of the threes might have had any impact on Western civilization. In this research, minimal that I did, I came up with 0. And I thought I would share with you that I was an utter failure in this regard. There we go. Okay.